Everyone in town called the black woman too ugly to marry. Then the millionaire removed a bag and her heart stopped. That's exactly what happened on that cold September morning when 28-year-old Rebecca Thompson found herself at the center of a spectacle of humiliation that would change her life forever. "Next!" shouted Victoria Sterling, organizer of Millbrook's traditional charity event, as she pointed impatiently at Rebecca. The singles ball was the most prestigious occasion in town, where wealthy men chose their partners from among the approved candidates of the local high society. Rebecca walked slowly to the makeshift stage in the club's main hall. She could hear the not-so-discreet whispers. What is she doing here? Who had the nerve to nominate her? Poor thing, doesn't she know she doesn't belong here? Victoria Sterling, heiress to the wealthiest family in the region, made no attempt to hide her disdain. "Darling, I think there's been a mistake. This event is for, well, you understand." Her fake smile did nothing to hide the cruelty behind her carefully chosen words. "There's been no mistake," Rebecca replied with a calmness that surprised everyone. "My application was accepted, I paid the participation fee, and I'm here by right." The murmuring in the audience intensified. David Sterling, Victoria's son and one of the most eligible bachelors, laughed loudly. "Mom, let her try. It'll be fun to see someone finally put this girl in her place." That's when something unexpected happened. An elegant man, approximately 45 years old, calmly rose from the front row. Jonathan Blake, CEO of one of the largest technology companies in the country, had arrived discreetly in town the week before. No one expected him to attend the event. "I would like to talk to you, miss," he said, addressing Rebecca directly. The room fell completely silent. Victoria Sterling choked. "Mr. Blake, I'm sure there are other candidates more suited to your profile." Jonathan completely ignored the comment and reached out his hand to Rebecca to help her down from the stage. "Can I speak with you privately?" As they walked to a more secluded corner of the hall, Rebecca kept her posture upright, but her eyes revealed something that few people there could recognize: the serenity of someone who had weathered much worse storms and lived to tell the tale. What those Millbrook high society people didn't know was that Rebecca Thompson wasn't just another woman trying to earn a place among them. She had returned to town with a very specific purpose, carrying secrets that could shake the foundations of that seemingly perfect community. If you are enjoying this story of overcoming adversity and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple humiliation would become the catalyst for a turnaround that no one would ever forget. While Rebecca talked discreetly with Jonathan Blake in a corner of the hall, Victoria Sterling couldn't hide her irritation. 10 minutes, she muttered to her son David. "Give him 10 minutes to realize his mistake and come talk to more appropriate candidates." What Victoria didn't know was that this wasn't the first time Rebecca Thompson had set foot in that hall. 15 years ago, she had been one of the Sterling family's most dedicated employees, working as a personal assistant to the family patriarch, Harold Sterling, Victoria's father. Rebecca remembered perfectly that night in December 2008 when she accidentally discovered documents proving that the Sterling Foundation, supposedly a charity, was embezzling millions of dollars in donations intended for needy communities. She was young, idealistic, and believed that doing the right thing was always the best option. "Mr. Sterling," she had said at the time, "I found some inconsistencies in the Foundation's financial reports. I think you should take a look at this." Harold Sterling didn't even glance at the papers. "Rebecca, dear, you're meddling in matters you don't understand. I suggest you forget what you saw and stay focused on your administrative tasks." But Rebecca couldn't forget. For weeks, she collected more evidence, photographed documents, and recorded conversations. When she finally mustered the courage to go to the authorities, she discovered that Harold Sterling had beaten her to it. The accusation was devastating: theft of confidential documents and attempted blackmail. With powerful lawyers and political influence, the Sterlings managed not only to fire her, but also to ensure that she would never again be able to find work in Millbrook. A troubled young black woman trying to defame a respectable family, Victoria had told the local newspapers at the time. Rebecca was forced to leave town with only a suitcase and her reputation in tatters. Her mother, who worked as a maid for other high-society families, lost her job by association. The humiliation was so profound that many believed they would never return. "So," said Jonathan Blake, interrupting her memories, "you grew up here in Millbrook?" "For a while," Rebecca replied, watching Victoria Sterling gesticulate nervously to a group of other organizers. "Let's just say I had to seek opportunities elsewhere." Jonathan noticed something in her tone of voice, a mixture of controlled pain and steely determination. "And now you've decided to come back to attend a networking event?" Rebecca smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's just say I have some unfinished business." Across the room, Victoria Sterling finally lost her patience. Walking purposefully toward them, she unceremoniously interrupted their conversation. "Mr. Blake, I apologize for interrupting, but I'm afraid you don't have all the information you need about this person." Victoria practically spat out the last words. "Rebecca Thompson has a troubled history in this town. She was fired for attempted blackmail and theft. She's not exactly the kind of company someone of your caliber should be considering." The silence that followed was deafening. Several people around them stopped talking to watch the scene. Rebecca remained motionless, but Jonathan noticed that her hands clenched slightly, as if she were preparing for something. "That's interesting," Rebecca finally said, her voice as calm as the surface of a lake before a storm. "How stories change depending on who tells them, don't they, Victoria?" Victoria Sterling felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine. There was something in Rebecca's gaze, a confidence she didn't remember seeing 15 years ago. It was as if the woman in front of her knew something she didn't. "I don't know what you're talking about," Victoria replied, but her voice betrayed a growing nervousness. "Not yet," Rebecca replied softly. "But you will." Jonathan Blake watched the interaction with growing fascination. As CEO of one of the country's largest technology companies, he had learned to recognize when someone was playing a game far more complex than it appeared on the surface. David Sterling, who had approached the group, laughed loudly. "Mom, she's trying to sound mysterious. It's pathetic. Rebecca, why don't you go back to whatever hole you crawled out of and spare us the charade?" Then Rebecca did something no one expected. She laughed. Not a nervous or embarrassed laugh, but a genuine confident laugh that echoed through the room. "David," she said, "you've always been terrible at judging people. That hasn't changed." She turned to Jonathan. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Blake. I'm sure we'll see each other again very soon." As Rebecca walked calmly toward the exit, Victoria Sterling felt a strange sensation in her stomach. The woman she had destroyed 15 years ago had returned, but not as the naive and vulnerable young woman they had driven out of town. This Rebecca Thompson exuded a confidence that came from someone who had fought battles and emerged victorious. And for the first time in years, Victoria Sterling began to wonder if she had profoundly underestimated what this woman was capable of. What none of the Sterlings could have imagined was that during her 15 years of exile, Rebecca had not only rebuilt her life, she had become exactly the kind of person who could turn their humiliation into her own sweetest victory. The week after the singles ball, Rebecca Thompson did not disappear as Victoria Sterling had expected. On the contrary, she did something that left the entire Millbrook elite baffled. She rented the most elegant office on Main Street, right in the center of town, and hired a team of assistants. Corporate Transparency Consulting, that's what the golden plaque on the door said. Victoria Sterling passed by the place 3 times that week, always pretending she was just shopping nearby, but actually trying to figure out what the hell Rebecca was planning. "She can't afford it," David Sterling grumbled during family dinner. "She's probably spending her life savings just to impress us. Pathetic." Harold Sterling, the family patriarch who had orchestrated Rebecca's downfall 15 years ago, laughed as he cut his steak. "Let the girl play businesswoman. In a few months, when the money runs out, she'll leave again. This time for good." What they didn't know was that Rebecca had spent the last 15 years not only rebuilding her life, but building a network of contacts that would give any CEO nightmares. During her law degree at Harvard University, earned on a full scholarship, she had impressed professors and classmates with her determination and sharp intelligence. But it was during her master's degree in corporate investigation at Columbia that Rebecca truly discovered her calling. Her thesis on patterns of corruption in small-town charitable organizations had been published in 3 specialized journals and cited in dozens of federal investigations. Dr. Michael Chun, a former FBI agent and Rebecca's professor, had become more than a mentor. He was the mastermind behind the operation unfolding in Millbrook. 15 years, he had told Rebecca during a video conference 3 months earlier. 15 years of impunity is more than enough. It's time to collect on that debt with interest. Jonathan Blake, for his part, had not appeared in Millbrook by chance. As CEO of one of the largest technology companies in the country, he had access to investigative resources that would make any private detective drool with envy. More importantly, he had a personal score to settle with organizations that pretended to do charity work while lining their own pockets. The Sterlings have no idea who they're messing with, Jonathan told Rebecca during a discreet meeting in his office. My company develops forensic analysis software for the federal government. Finding financial irregularities is literally what we do best. Rebecca smiled, remembering the look of contempt on Victoria Sterling's face. They always underestimate people like me. They think that because I come from a humble family, because I'm black, because I was put in my place once, I'll never be able to fight back. Fatal mistake, Jonathan agreed. Because now you're no longer a 23-year-old assistant trying to do the right thing. You're an expert in fighting corruption with resources, knowledge, and powerful allies. Meanwhile, at the Sterling mansion, Victoria was growing increasingly nervous. 3 of her high society friends had mentioned that they had received visits from auditors, asking about donations made to the Sterling Foundation over the years. Routine, Rebecca had explained when confronted by one of the donors. Just checking to make sure the funds are being applied properly. David Sterling, ever impulsive, decided to take action. He showed up at Rebecca's office unannounced, hoping to intimidate her like in the old days. Listen here, Rebecca, he said, planting his hands on her desk. I don't know what game you're playing, but I suggest you stop before you get hurt. Again. Rebecca looked up from the documents she was reviewing, Sterling Foundation financial reports from the last 15 years, obtained through an official transparency request that no family lawyer had been able to block. David, she said calmly, you've always been predictable. Your father sent you here to threaten me because he's getting nervous. Want to know why? She turned the computer screen toward him. Because in 15 years of charitable work, you've embezzled more than $3.2 million that should have gone to needy communities. David's face paled. You have no proof of anything. Not yet, Rebecca smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But I will. And when that happens, you'll find that the naive young woman you drove out of town has learned a few things about justice over the last 15 years. David left the office visibly shaken, but trying to keep up appearances. At the door, he turned around. You know my father has connections all over the state, right? One phone call from him and you'll disappear again. David, Rebecca called softly. This time, I'm the one with the connections. And unlike your father, my connections are legal. That night, Harold Sterling called an emergency meeting with his lawyers. I want this woman investigated, he said, banging his fist on the table. I want to know where the money came from to put on this circus, who her allies are, everything. The family's chief lawyer, Robert Crawford, scratched his beard worriedly. Mr. Sterling, perhaps it would be better to try to reach a settlement. If she really has evidence. Evidence of what? Harold exploded. Of a foundation that has brought millions in improvements to this city? Rebecca Thompson is an opportunist who is trying to blackmail us again. Only this time, she won't succeed. What Harold Sterling didn't know was that, at that very moment, 3 floors below his office, A team of forensic accountants was analyzing every transaction, every receipt, every bank transfer made by the Sterling Foundation since 1995. And what they were finding was far worse than even Rebecca had imagined. The Sterlings had built an empire based on the systematic theft of resources intended for those most in need. But 15 years of impunity were about to come to an end. Rebecca Thompson had returned home, and this time, she wasn't alone. Like a storm that forms silently on the horizon before devastating everything in its path, Rebecca's meticulous preparation was reaching the point of no return. The Sterlings continued to underestimate the woman they had once humiliated and expelled, unaware that each act of arrogance only strengthened the determination of someone who had learned that true revenge is built with patience, intelligence, and powerful allies. What would happen when 15 years of carefully compiled evidence finally came to light was something that even the Sterlings, with all their influence and connections, would not be prepared to face. The storm that Rebecca had carefully orchestrated was about to hit Millbrook with devastating force. Friday, October 15th, at 6 p.m., exactly 15 years and 1 month after her expulsion from the city, she had scheduled a press conference in the same hall where she had been humiliated at the singles ball. Victoria Sterling woke up that morning with a strange feeling in her stomach. During the week, 3 major donors to the Sterling Foundation had cancelled their annual contributions without explanation. Worse still, her personal bank account had been frozen for investigation of possible financial irregularities, according to an official statement that had arrived by email at 6 a.m. "This is ridiculous," Harold Sterling shouted on the phone to his lawyers. 15 years of service to the community, and now we're being treated like criminals because of a resentful black woman, added David Sterling, who had lost 2 important contracts that week. Apparently, his clients had received worrying information about the family's integrity. What the Sterlings didn't know was that Rebecca hadn't spent the last 15 years just preparing herself professionally. Dr. Michael Chun, her mentor and former FBI agent, had used his contacts to open a quiet federal investigation into the Sterling Foundation. For 6 months, federal auditors specializing in white-collar crime had combed through every document, every transaction, every penny that had passed through the organization. At 5:45 p.m., Rebecca entered the Millbrook Social Club hall wearing an impeccable navy blue suit, the same hall where 15 years earlier she had been treated like an object for sale. This time, however, the main table was occupied by federal prosecutors, FBI agents, national press journalists, and IRS representatives. Jonathan Blake sat in the front row, no longer as a curious spectator but as a key witness. His company had provided free forensic analysis that traced every dollar embezzled by the Sterlings over 15 years. Victoria Sterling arrived accompanied by Harold and David, all escorted by visibly nervous lawyers. "This is a circus," Victoria whispered to her husband. "She's trying to humiliate us publicly." "Actually," Rebecca said into the microphone, her calm voice echoing through the crowded hall, "I'm here to present facts. 15 years ago, I was accused of attempted blackmail for trying to expose irregularities at the Sterling Foundation. Today, the U.S. Department of Justice confirms that I was right." Federal prosecutor Marcus Washington stood up and approached the microphone. "During an 8-month investigation, we uncovered conclusive evidence that the Sterling Foundation systematically embezzled $3.7 million intended for social programs between 2008 and 2023. A murmur rippled through the room. Victoria Sterling felt her legs tremble. The funds, the prosecutor continued, were redirected to personal accounts belonging to the Sterling family, the purchase of luxury properties, international travel, and private investments. We have complete documentation of 847 fraudulent transactions." Rebecca watched calmly as the world of her former tormentors crumbled in real time. For years, she had meticulously collected every piece of evidence. Bank statements obtained through court orders. Recordings of conversations made by repentant Foundation employees. Internal documents leaked by accountants with guilty consciences. "Lies!" shouted Harold Sterling, standing up abruptly. This is a smear campaign orchestrated by a resentful woman who... Mr. Sterling, Federal Agent Lisa Chun, Dr. Michael Chen's cousin, calmly interrupted, "You are being formally charged with fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement of public funds." David Sterling tried to slip out of the hall discreetly, but was intercepted by two federal agents. "Mr. David Sterling, you are also being indicted for the same crimes." Victoria Sterling looked desperately around the hall, searching for friendly faces, but found only looks of shock, disappointment, and even anger. Mrs. Patricia Morrison, one of the foundation's largest donors, was clearly furious. "My money was supposed to feed needy children," she shouted. "You bought a yacht." Rebecca approached the microphone again. 15 years ago, Victoria Sterling told the newspapers that I was a troubled young black woman trying to defame a respectable family. Today, that same family is being criminally prosecuted for exactly the crimes I tried to expose. The local TV station's camera focused on Victoria Sterling's face, which had turned completely pale. Tears began to stream down her cheeks, smearing her carefully applied makeup. "For 15 years, Rebecca continued, you lived as if you were untouchable. You treated people like me, people you considered inferior, as if we were disposable. You used prejudice to hide crimes." Harold Sterling tried one last desperate gambit. "She's lying. That woman was fired for theft. She's not credible." Dr. Michael Chun, who had remained silent until then, rose calmly. "Mr. Sterling, I am Dr. Michael Chun, former FBI special agent and professor of criminal investigation at Columbia. Rebecca Thompson was my master's student. Her research on corruption in small-town charities has been published in 3 academic journals and cited in 47 federal investigations. She is quite literally one of the nation's leading experts in detecting the very type of crime you have committed." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria Sterling began to sob openly. David Sterling was being handcuffed. Harold Sterling looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "The Sterling family's assets are being frozen," the prosecutor announced. "Their bank accounts, properties, and investments will be liquidated to compensate the victims of their crimes." Rebecca looked directly at Victoria Sterling. 15 years ago, you told me I should know my place. Today, you are learning yours." Jonathan Blake watched the scene with a mixture of admiration and shock. The woman he had known as a humiliated participant in a social event was, in fact, a force of nature who had dedicated a decade and a half of her life to ensuring that justice was done. The CNN reporter who had covered the event live summed up the situation. In a cinematic twist, a woman who was falsely accused and driven from her hometown returns 15 years later as the expert who brings down the criminal empire of her former oppressors. As the Sterlings were escorted out of the hall under federal custody, Rebecca remained on stage, dignified and serene. There was no malicious triumph in her expression, only the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew that, finally, the truth had prevailed. Mrs. Patricia Morrison approached Rebecca after the press conference. "Dear," she said with tears in her eyes, "forgive me. We all believed their lies. You were right all along." "Justice is worth waiting for," Rebecca replied softly, "even when it takes 15 years to arrive." But as the dust from the revelation settled, one question remained. How did a woman who had lost everything manage not only to rise again, but to return with enough force to bring down an empire built on decades of lies and privilege? And more importantly, what had 15 years of exile really taught Rebecca Thompson about the true meaning of power, justice, and redemption? 6 months later, Rebecca Thompson was sitting in her new office in Washington, D.C., as senior advisor to the Department of Justice for white-collar crime. The view from the window showed the Capitol, a symbol that justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. The Sterlings faced a very different reality. Harold Sterling, at 72, had been sentenced to 18 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. David Sterling got 12 years and was serving his sentence in a state penitentiary, far from the privileges he had always known. Victoria Sterling, after a nervous breakdown during the trial, had lost not only her freedom for 8 years, but also custody of her 2 minor children. The Sterling mansion was auctioned off to pay compensation to the victims. Mrs. Patricia Morrison, one of the main donors who had been deceived, bought the property and turned it into a community center for underprivileged youth, exactly the kind of program the fake foundation pretended to support. "It's ironic," commented Dr. Michael Chun during an interview with Time magazine, which named Rebecca one of the 100 most influential people of the year. They tried to destroy an idealistic young woman who wanted to protect the vulnerable. They ended up creating the expert who protects the vulnerable on a national scale. Jonathan Blake, who had become not only Rebecca's ally but also her partner, laughed whenever he remembered his first impression at the dance. "I thought I was meeting a humiliated woman at a ridiculous social event. In fact, I was standing before one of the most brilliant minds in the fight against corporate corruption." The Sterling case had sparked a wave of similar investigations in small towns across the country. Rebecca received daily invitations for lectures, consultancies, and investigations. Her expertise had become a global benchmark. Millbrook had also changed dramatically. The new mayor, elected on a campaign focused on transparency, implemented auditing systems that would prevent new cases of corruption. The city that had once expelled Rebecca now had a square named after her, inaugurated by unanimous popular vote. Mrs. Patricia Morrison met Rebecca during the inauguration ceremony. "Dear," she said, holding the hands of the woman she had once helped humiliate, "you taught us that dignity cannot be bought with money or social status. It is built with character." 3 years later, Rebecca received a letter in prison. It was from Victoria Sterling. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," the handwritten letter said. "But I need you to know, you were right about everything. You always were. I hope that someday you can forgive me for the harm we caused." Rebecca kept the letter without replying. Some wounds heal with time, but true justice does not require forgiveness of the guilty. It requires that the victims find their power. During a lecture at Harvard University, a student asked, "Professor Thompson, did you plan this revenge for 15 years? Rebecca smiled, the same serene smile that had baffled Victoria Sterling at that dance. It wasn't revenge. It was patience. Revenge is when you destroy someone out of anger. Justice is when you become so powerful that those who try to destroy you destroy themselves by trying to repeat the same crimes. Today, Rebecca Thompson is recognized as one of the leading experts in combating corruption in the United States. Her story has been turned into a documentary and a book, and has inspired dozens of other victims to seek justice through competence, not anger. Victoria Sterling is serving her sentence in a women's prison, where she has learned that privilege is no shield against consequences. Harold Sterling died in prison 2 years later, taking with him the secrets of other families who likely committed similar crimes. David Sterling lost everything: family, money, reputation, and freedom. The lesson of Rebecca Thompson's story is simple but powerful. The best revenge is not to stoop to the level of those who have wronged you. It is to rise so high that when they finally look up, they realize you are in a place they can never reach. 15 years of humiliation turned into a lifetime of purpose. Rebecca proved that when you are unfairly knocked down, you can choose to stay on the ground complaining, or use that fall as momentum to fly higher than your oppressors ever imagined possible. If this story of overcoming adversity and justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that prove that true strength grows exactly where they tried to break us.